So Steve Cohen has spoken, and now there's more intrigue, not just about the Mets for the rest of this season, but moving forward. Let's discuss. So obviously the Mets right now mired in the muck as they sit here now having lost 8 of their last 9. They did win a game on Saturday in Pittsburgh against the Pirates, but ended up losing 2 out of 3 to the Pirates over the weekend. As right now the Mets sitting right now in the NL East at 31 and 35. They are in big trouble right now, obviously, as far as what they hope to do down the road as far as playoffs are concerned. This was a team that had championship aspirations, and as of right now, this, as we all know, unfortunately does not look like a championship team. That said, Steve Cohen has spoken. Now, it was interesting to note. I mentioned this in my last video because of the tweet that I saw from Andy Martino of SNY, where he said that do not expect Steve Cohen to jump out and be like George Steinbrenner right off the bat here and start firing everybody and having heads roll. That's not going to happen. And Cohen has now spoken, and he confirms that report because in a really good article, fantastic job by Joel Sherman of the New York Post, who always does a great job covering Major League Baseball, especially in New York, basically gave the floor to Steve Cohen and let him speak openly as he possibly could or wants to about this baseball team right now. And he says that he's not going to blow things up. He is going to let this thing progress. He believes basically in the people that they have in place right now. He understands that the pitching situation is the real problem now, which is kind of ironic because he's the one that gave out those big contracts to Justin Verlander and of course, Max Scherzer. But it was all for the prospect of potentially winning right now. Let me share a couple of quotes here with you. First of all, he says, when things get really bad, I'm not going to blow up. I don't think that's the proper response. I don't think it solves anything other than it gives people a one-day story. I'm trying to be thoughtful about this and not reactionary because I've got enough experience, whether it be in my business or in baseball now, to know that when things are going great, you are never as great as you think you are. When things are really going bad, you're not as bad as you think you are. Things can turn around fairly quickly. Cohen then goes on to say, they're talented, they're smart, they're passionate, they're veterans. We have some Hall of Famers. I'm not writing these people off. Their record is too strong to just write them off. I know these guys well. I have conversations with these people. I know how much they care. I know how much they want to win. He goes on to say, Billy, as in Billy Epler, the general manager, and the entire management team are working hard. They're trying to figure this out. You got to give them credit. They're all over it. I'm all over it with them. I'm not leaving them and just saying, go fix this. It's not your problem. It's our problem. I'm all over it. He also goes on to endorse Buck Showalter, saying, in short, that he's the right man for the job and that he has confidence in him and confidence in this Met management team to try to figure this thing out right now. And he also laid a lot of the obvious, saying, hey, look, right now it's not the great part of the year where you can make a lot of big moves and trades and shake the roster up, obviously, because teams still believe that they're in contention and that it's a long season. So I got to commend Steve Cohen from that standpoint, having a very measured take on things right now. You can't blame him. It's very understandable. And I think that's something that at the moment right now you have to, if you're going to take it for face value, have to appreciate. You really do. You really do. And I understand Met fans are frustrated. And he also spoke about this as well, which he says, everything's amplified in New York. Our fans are passionate. They want immediate answers. Sometimes there aren't immediate answers. I'll come back. No one anticipated that our problem would be our pitching. No one anticipated that. That's life, right? You wake up one day and you've got a problem you don't know you had, whether it's my hedge fund business, whether it's General Life. Blank happens. Of course, I said shit happens. That's the way it goes, and then you've got to deal with it. That's what we're trying to do. Are we panicked? Are we not panicked? I don't panic. I've been around too long. You got to be very careful about reactionary recency bias and reacting to what's clearly a mediocre performance at best and inconsistent performance. And everybody knows that. We are all banging our heads trying to find solutions. So, again, he kind of goes on and on with a lot of the same points and platitudes, but it's a very measured response about trying not to panic and giving this team time. Because let's be honest, this is a team with the highest payroll in baseball right now, $370 million. They have a lot of talent on this roster. A lot of guys who have already shown, just a year ago, when this team won 101 games, that they can win games. Guys like Sterling Marte and Mark Hanna and Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo, these guys have to step up and deliver, especially now over the next month with Pete Alonso now on the shelf. I know a lot of people are going to look at the production and say, how do you replace Pete Alonso? Right now, the Mets have players to do it. We see Francisco Alvarez over the last couple of days have some big home runs. Had 3 home runs in the last 4 days now. 2 in Atlanta and then 1 the other day in Pittsburgh. There's ways to get production and positive production, but the Mets have to figure out in the pitching. We know this offense can deliver. Their pitching has been suspect, and that's the bottom line. Now, what is interesting, what is a developing story here for the Mets, is while Steve Cohen says, I'm not going to panic, and we're going to take it basically day by day and see how this thing rolls as we move over the course of the season, there's now rumblings that there could be changes coming in the front office, and that is possibly the hiring of David Stearns. And the reports are this initially came from Bob Nightingale of USA Today, and everyone else has now jumped on it, that the Mets are poised to hire David Stearns to be their president of baseball operations. Remember, the Mets, ever since Cohen bought the team just about now 3 years ago, the Mets have been looking for that permanent president of baseball operations. They haven't found it yet. They brought in Sandy Alderson to try to be an interim president of baseball operations, just kind of smooth things over the transition from the Wilpons to Steve Cohen. Obviously, they bring in Billy Epler to be the general manager of the team, but they didn't have that, if you want to say baseball czar or that head of baseball operations looking over things. That could change very soon with the potential hiring of David Stearns. Now, Stearns is still under employment by the Brewers, even though he stepped down from the Brewers' GM job at the end of last season. He's still under contract for this season, so the Mets can't officially go get him and sign him until the fall. So, that's something to pay attention to, is if David Stearns comes in, and look, if the reports are true that he will come in, what's that going to mean for everybody else? Because, while it's time not to panic now, that does not mean if the Mets do not make the playoffs, or let's just say finish, 81-81 at the end of the year, or 82-80 at the end of the year, and maybe the Mets, maybe at that point Steve Cohen wants to make some changes in the front office, what would that look like with David Stearns? One thing that is interesting, and that if you go back to last year in 2022, the Mets have been on this role of trying to flirt with David Stearns for a while. And Andy Martino reported last year that he and Billy Epler are pretty close. So they both know each other pretty well. So maybe that means Epler is safe. Maybe that means he would end up with a reduced role at some point. I'm not sure. None of us know right now. But that's something to keep an eye on, just to put that in the back of your mind. Also, if David Stearns does come to the Mets, what does that mean for Buck Showalter? I think that's going to be a very interesting question to ask as well. Buck, now keep in mind, I would hate to see the Mets move on from Buck Showalter, because I think that he is a very good manager, and he has given the Mets a lot of credibility, something that they did not have for a very, very long time. But he does, and will be entering 2024 on a lame duck contract. So he only would have 1 year left on his deal after this season. That's going to be another thing that the Mets would have to look into as well, if they want to keep him around, or do they look elsewhere? I hate to say that. I mean, keep in mind, they do have somebody named Carlos Beltran. You may have heard of him. Carlos Beltran in that front office now with the Mets. Remember, he was the manager of this team for all of just a few weeks until he got outed in the Astros cheating scandal. So, things to think about, folks. These are things to think about. So, it's very interesting right now to see how this thing is going to develop. The Mets have been pursuing David Stearns for a while now, and it looks like it's going to happen. He is a New York native. He grew up as a Met fan, and the Mets have wanted him to be their guy for a while. He's only 38 years old, so he is one of these young, up and coming. I don't want to say up and coming at this point, because he's obviously had success with the Brewers, but he's one of these young faces in baseball, a part of this sabermetric generation. Guys like that have produced guys like Theo Epstein, and we can go on and on. Those kind of individuals to possibly run the Mets. Now, that doesn't mean the Mets are going to become a major dynasty. I'm not telling you that. We'll be interested to see what David Stearns becomes and how he affects what the Mets may look like moving forward, not just for the rest of this, not just what happens at the end, especially at the end of this season, depending on how things go. So, very interesting situation the Mets find themselves in. Obviously, they want to find a way to get back into contention here and get into the postseason. 31-35. It was a disappointing loss to Pittsburgh on Sunday, losing 2-1, especially when the pitching was actually pretty good, especially from Carlos Carrasco. So that's the disappointment from today, and it's been a disappointing first half of the year for the Mets. The injuries, of course, to Pete Alonso notwithstanding, has been a major hit as well to a team that hopes that they can get to the playoffs. So we'll see how things change if they do. Take the quotes from Steve Cohen as being forthright for the moment right now. That does not mean that there isn't things happening in the background right now, things that could be changing and things that could be brewing, pun intended, for the Mets down the road. Like and subscribe. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Sports Talk Nation.